Welcome to the Prepared Leader, From Crisis to Confidence, the monthly podcast for leaders who know that tough times aren't a matter of if, but when. I'm Helen Lipscombe, and each episode we explore bold strategies, real-world stories, and practical insights to help you lead with clarity, confidence, and resilience. Today, we are focusing on an area that many business owners overlook: the opportunity to grow by selling to the public sector. For many, it feels too complex, too competitive, or simply not for a business like ours. But what if those are just myths? I'm joined by Shiona Campbell, founder of BDS Business Development Support Ltd. After 15 years in local government and leadership in the third sector, Shiona founded BDS in 2017 to mentor and guide owner-led businesses through the process of identifying, bidding for, and winning public sector contracts. We'll talk about breaking down the barriers to public sector sales and how this untapped market can be a catalyst for sustained growth. Shiona, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us. I think what would be really helpful is just for you to talk a little bit maybe about kind of how you moved from working in the public sector and the third sector into running your own organisation and that journey.
Thanks very much for inviting me on, Helen. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I went into the public sector from university, and I actually wasn't involved in procurement at that point. So I went into trading standards, and ultimately ended up leading a team of enforcement officers who actually enforced crime throughout Scotland. So we were working across local authority boundaries.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was the project manager, and we were externally funded. So I was involved in applications for our funding, and it was all from central government, but it started in 2008 happened. The project started in 2008 happened. The banking crash, and the public sector started looking at how they could save money. Mm-hmm. So we were a team covering Scotland, as I said, and we were asked to look at different cuts to our budget. So we were asked to look at a cut of 40%. We were asked to look at no cut and everything in between that. But ultimately, during that time, by looking at funding, all from central government, but looking at different funding pots, I managed to grow the team rather than having to downsize the team, which was really good. So that was my first kind of dabble into grant funding. It was at that point. And then from there, as a project manager, I was also involved in bits of procurement, but from a buyer's side. Yeah, so all the rules and regulations. So if we wanted anything, we had to follow the council. We were employed by a council, so we had to follow all their policies and procedures for that. So did that, but ultimately wasn't really enjoying the job, wasn't really enjoying what I was doing, and started looking elsewhere, and ended up making a leap to the third sector. So in there obviously looking for grant funding the whole time, third sector projects. So I started off in a project, again, I was a project manager, but began to look at funding that would sustain us beyond the initial grant period. So was dabbling a wee bit, and it was very much dabbling at that point into grant funding. The project was only a 9-month project. So getting towards the end of that, I started looking elsewhere and ended up in one of Scotland's biggest social care charities, working in the business development team, so this charity, they turned over £60 million, but they didn't do any fundraising at all. It was all through public sector bids that they kept the charity running. So there was tiny bits of fundraising of maybe a coffee morning that would raise £50 for a service, but yeah, on the grand scheme of it, we didn't do any fundraising. So I was in a team of 3 there. And quite quickly, somebody went off sick and somebody left. So I ended up in this massive learning curve because we needed the public sector contracts. And I was looking for bids for us to go for, but also looking at what we already had and sustaining funding so that we could keep services running. So yeah, that was a really, really steep learning curve. Went from there to another social care charity. And from that, I was seeing lots of opportunities out there, and I was beginning to think, actually, there's a lot of opportunities for small businesses. I wasn't feeling my fit was particularly great in the second charity I worked for. And yeah, so started looking for opportunities for me and for others, and yeah, set up BDS, Business Development Support Ltd at that point. And it's amazing. So yeah, at first you don't really know where you'll get your work from, but the relationships you build from before pay dividends at that point. So.
I think that's really good. And just sort of listening to that whole story, I can hear, each time you were building on that sort of base experience of it's the fundamentals of how do you run the business. But where can we find funding? But how do we access the different types of funding streams from that sort of public sector into central government starting point to, okay, yeah, there's a lot of grants or available pots of money there that if you know how to get them, that can help you. And obviously you were very successful in that situation of at a very challenging time for the public sector to get to the right thing. But also when you got into the third sector, again, it's that same principle of, I guess, just seeing the opportunities and not feeling restricted to your organization or your sector, or perhaps those standard almost fundraising approaches that certainly the third sector would take, and just kind of thinking a little bit differently about what's available and how you can try and access it.
Yeah, and that's definitely something I learned in the second charity that I worked for, where we were, so they had much less of a turnover, but they had many more people and within the team. So our business development, well, it was always called business development where I was, but the tender writing, the tender finding, it was always done by a team. There was then other elements to this team in the second charity. So they did have a community fundraising team. They had an events team. They were also in about wills and trusts. They were doing grant funding. So they had a lot more elements to it. And what I've really learned from that is that you can't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
So not so much with the different funding things, but the management team there were willing to apply for anything that they could.
Right.
And yeah, and I found that really difficult because there was times when we'd identify things and we'd say, because there was a real pressure to find things, so we'd say, we found this, but we don't think it's a good fit. And that could be because there was a local organisation delivering it really well. It could be that we didn't quite have the right experience. So when you looked at who else was running things, that might not go particularly well.
Yeah.
But they wanted to go for everything. And sometimes we were ending up at the point of submission, and they would say, there was one time and it was 15 minutes before it was due to be submitted. And they said, I don't think we should go for that. And we were like, yeah, but we told you that 3 weeks ago. And that's really amazing. I think, well, it didn't feel it at the time, but that's really grounded my experience now of looking at things in a different way, I think, and whether it's going to work for people or not.
I think that's really important because I think, again, as a small business owner, you often take that slightly scattergun approach of just go out there and find the opportunities and go through all the opportunities you can find, and I guess feel a little bit of pressure to say yes to many things or put yourself forward for many things. I really like that, I guess, more strategic approach. And is there a particular, I know it's the first things you would think that people should be starting to think about, or in a particular approach that people should be using to try and be a bit more strategic about this and try and think a bit more about the right opportunities to engage with?
Can I go take you back? You said about the scattergun approach.
Yes.
What that made me think. So when you first start in business, you don't really know where the next bit of work will come from. You find some customers, and I think this is a definite pattern for a lot of small business owners when they start, is that they find a customer and the customer loves what they do and loves the way they work, and they start asking them to do more and more things.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, when you don't really know how your business will grow, you possibly don't even know what you really want to be doing. You've got a bit of an idea and you're waiting for it to shape. You can end up saying yes to anything. Some of it works, some of it doesn't.
No.
And that's a really interesting start to businesses, I think. But yeah, I've definitely seen the scattergun approach of, so some people are very, very reluctant about tenders, and they've got definitely myths you spoke about around them. And then there's other people who think this is an amazing opportunity and want to grab it and will do the scattergun of I'll go for anything. So I think it's really important to think about what you're delivering just now and who you're delivering it to and how you want to grow your business. So it could be you've got like 3 main services, but you want to grow one of them. One of them you'll do, you can make a bit of money out of it, but it's not maybe your passion. So you maybe wouldn't want to look for tenders in that area, but you would definitely want to look at the bit you want to grow and the bit that you enjoy doing.
Yeah, and I really like that, because I think that is about a bit of clarity. And that again is that you say when you first set up a business, you are very much of the, I do know what I, to some extent, generally know why I'm doing it, and I know what I like about what I do, but there's still a huge breadth of things you could get involved in within any sector. There's a huge amount. Even within my own sector, I go from training to delivery to writing documents, and each of those I do like at certain points, but also there are times and there are certain elements of that I do more because it's part and parcel of the whole program rather than it's the bit I like to focus on. But I think that again is that important bit to come back to, saying, okay, which elements of your business do you want to focus on, and looking for things around, looking for opportunities around those and bids around those makes a lot of sense, because then you are, in all senses, doing the right thing for everybody. You're not just doing things just to tick over. You're actually doing the things that people need because they're asking for it, and that you are maybe the best person, hopefully the best person to do that for them. Based on your experience and kind of what you can bring to the table.
Yeah, and with some public sector contracts, you could be committing to delivering something for 4 years.
Yeah.
And if it's not really what you're enjoying doing, and there's quite a lot of the bit you don't enjoy, 4 years is a long time. It's different taking on a 3-month contract doing that, because you can see the end of that. 4 years.
4 years is a very long time. It's a very long time. I guess one thing that comes to mind just thinking that through, and those, these public sector contracts can be a lot bigger than your standard ones. Is there any advice, again, you'll be giving to small businesses if they're starting to think about moving into that sector, and what, notwithstanding the knowing what you want to do, but then, what else should you be thinking about in terms of your sustainability, what you might want to focus on from a length of bid or those kind of things?
But one thing you would want to have a look at is what experience you're bringing into that. So you'll normally be asked to provide 2 examples of similar contracts that you've delivered. So a lot of people, I find, can get quite scared by that term contract. And yeah, I have met people before who've said, I don't really have contracts. And I'm like, no, but you do, because if you're delivered, so what you actually want to think about is the customers you've worked with longest. Or that have spent most with you, are the 2 ways of looking at it. And actually, you'll probably have formal agreements there, which are contracts in some ways. So you want to think about that to make sure you can secure the bids. For sustainability, you want to look at what you can deliver. So you need to have a good understanding of what you can deliver now. It used to be that you would be asked for double the turnover of the annual contract value. So if you're looking at something worth £100,000, they would look for you to have a turnover of £200,000.
Okay.
That doesn't tend to be asked for quite the same. It depends on the contract and the risk. What you'll more often find is that they'll look at either financial ratios that you have or credit scores and take it from there. But it does depend the type of contract that you're going for. So, but I think that whole turnover thing is actually kind of important, because to go from delivering, if you're turnover £100,000 at the moment, to go from that to delivering a £200,000 contract in a year could be a big jump. So you need to make sure, if you were making that jump, that you have the processes, the staffing, everything in place so that you are actually ultimately able to deliver. Because you will in some way have to persuade the buyer that you can deliver that as part of the tendering process.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, because then that starts to make me think about, that's part and parcel of your sustainability, but your organization's resilience. Can you provide enough evidence, and not necessarily just like your track record and, previous events, or evidence that you actually are sort of going to exist in 3 to 4 years, and you've got the team to help you do that. Because again, I imagine sometimes these are sole traders or individuals that are coming in to bid, which is absolutely fine, but it's then having that kind of wider network around you that you can draw on, and that gives again a bit of confidence to the people that are looking at your bids, that you're not just a single person doing this, or you're not just a very very small business that's not, that is starting out but isn't quite maybe at that point that they are, have the sustainability, I guess, and resilience to keep doing this kind of work.
Yes. And I was thinking about the whole resilience thing before, like yesterday and this morning.
Yeah.
And so resilience, you will get some tenders where they specifically ask about your resilience.
Yeah.
And you'll be asked about your business continuity plans and whatnot. But there's others where they don't specifically ask.
Okay.
But you would still be expected to draw that into some questions. So if you're, especially as a sole trader.
Yeah.
So like I've applied, well, I was successful for an associate trainers framework, where it was very much sole traders and small businesses, and they wanted to know about the business continuity and how you would do that. So they did have a specific question. But there's other questions where they'll be asking about like your team or how you're going to deliver this. And you do definitely need to think about your resilience and bring it in to the questions to make it clear that even as a single person, like a sole trader, that you have other experience to draw on, or that you have contingencies in place so that if anything were to happen, they would still get the delivery.
Yes, which again, I would complete that. Sort of good to know, but also good to be aware of, that you, to your point of, it's not necessarily explicitly there, but it is an important part of, as an organization, as no matter what size of organization that's doing the application, it's providing that assurance that, yes, I might be a single person, but I have got a few people that I can draw on, and if necessary, I can bring someone in to help you. And it might not be specific, but it might just be saying, there are people I know that can come in, but providing, again, that assurance to the individual reading your bid that you aren't just an individual person that brings a lot of risk with them, because that's what happens. I mean, that again was kind of where I started, again, when you were talking earlier around that, starting to get into the sustainability and how do you just provide the right information to people, is when you're bringing in third parties, and when we look at it from the kind of perspective of business, bringing in third parties, you are, or you should be, concerned about the risk that that's bringing to your operations. And part of that, if I was in the organization putting the bid out, I'd be asking the questions, and I'd be trying to say, if I was the business continuity person, I say we should be asking what your resilience, no matter what size of contract, or to some extent more so for the bigger ones, but definitely no matter what size of contract, because we want to be assured that those suppliers are going to be able to continue to deliver for us, no matter, if there was a disruption. And again, when we get into the detail of business continuity in an organization, you do that on a scale basis. So again, it's not for everybody in terms of the detail, but for those more important suppliers, you need to know that. So, I can see it from that side. So it makes sense that anybody putting together these bids should have that mindset of, what can I do to try and answer those questions? It would be easier if it's overtly asked. However, it doesn't need to be, because it does come into how are you running your organization. To your point, how do you resource this, whatever that question is about. Well, if you are a single person, what's the what's the continuity of operations? What's the assurance that you can give me that if you go down, there's something else available? And I've certainly experienced, even in sort of very small contracts that I've been securing in the last year, people are starting to ask more about, show me your business continuity plan. And so that it might not be a specific question again, but it is part and parcel of that due diligence process that people are following for any of this kind of work.
And in social, so my background when I started in tendering, as I said, was social care. And so we used to be asked about business continuity, and most tenders, I would say, it was there. And so we had the thing, and we had, normally you would, within your business continuity, you'd have a bit about pandemics.
Yeah.
But that's had to be looked at so much since COVID, because none of it, like part of it, like we would write into pandemics and stuff was, or like ill health, whatever, is you assumed you could draw people from other areas if you're a big enough company.
Yep.
But no, it didn't happen. You couldn't.
No.
There was so many reasons you couldn't during COVID, so that's had to be looked at, which is, so that's a bit of an aside. But
I think that's really interesting, because I think there's still I mean, again, taking it to the other side of writing your plans as an organisation, there's still an baked in assumption that there are critical parts of your business and there are non-critical parts of your business, and the non-critical parts of the business, we can just use those people. Yes. But to your point, particularly in those kind of events, it very much depends on the event, and we don't do scenario specific planning, because then that gets very complicated. Yeah. But you do have to think about, when you talk about evaluating your plans, it is about saying, actually, what assumptions have you made? And if we think about an example like a pandemic and taking, what did we see in those scenarios? Is it realistic to say that you're going to bring people from the corporate services function, because they're not going to be doing as much? Because having worked in healthcare, I feel like I've seen that somewhere in an old plan. It's fine, we'll just bring all the corporate service people and they can help us. And you're like, that's not, they're not going to, yes, they would be helping in a non-clinical manner, but at the same point, it's not a valid assumption, and it very quickly would get discounted and challenged by the fact that
part of ours was actually to take people from different geographic areas.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
She would have thought, the way we wrote it made perfect sense at the time. When we wrote it, about where it happened.
Yeah. I always find that an interesting one, because you do say that quite a lot in plans. It's like, it's fine. And then you go, well, actually, would you want to go somewhere else to do your, to support? No.
And there wasn't the people to do that, because
and there wasn't the people. And also, again, that very, very specific case in point, but actually it wasn't safe to move people around in those, again, we had the restrictions were so at certain points so geographically specific that it didn't make sense to move somebody from the northeast to the southeast, because actually you were sending them to a higher risk area.
Yeah, and what they tried to do was keep people in tight groups. Yes. So as small a team looking after service users as they could.
Yeah,
which all ultimately makes more sense than bussing people in from somewhere.
It does, and I think that is part and parcel of more robust plans. I'm going to say, not a really good plan, but a more robust plan is you come down to, okay, what do we actually need to run this as a core, and let's focus on that, because then you can hopefully build a bit more redundancy into those existing teams that are local, and then you guys go home for a few hours, we'll bring you back in later. Theoretically should work. Again, there's lots of examples where that didn't all work as expected, let's say, because it's always interesting, the specifics of that, the specifics of how do people react in those situations is always what can create more challenge, which is interesting. Definitely. Just, I guess, bring us back to the if people were interested in bidding and interested in kind of finding out what's out there, how would they go about doing that? If they're new to this, or they're not again, they're kind of discounted that as a market because it's the big public sector. I need to be having, I need a turnover of at least 500,000 before I even start to go there. what would be the first port of call for that?
Well, they can either approach somebody like me that,
Hmm.
that will help them to navigate that. But something you can do really, really easily is have a look at the Find a Tender website. So everything in England and Wales, all contracts valued over £12,000 must be advertised on there. So
Okay.
all public sector contracts. So it begins to give you a bit of a flavour of what's out there. And definitely the lower value
Yeah.
opportunities that a lot of people would assume weren't there. So although the limit's 12,000, you can find some lower value contracts as well.
Yeah.
So having a look at them is really, really worthwhile to give you an idea, because it's amazing. Well, I find it amazing, but I'm a bit of a geek in it, but it's amazing what the public sector buys. So like I've seen toothbrushing services, supervised toothbrushing services. I've
Really?
seen Santa being procured through the public sector, and then Santa's helpers the next day.
Okay.
And also like, and then some kind of more unusual stuff. So like mindfulness services, the Houses of Commons bought mindfulness services.
Ah.
So yeah, so there's a lot of different things out there. So some
Okay.
people would assume the public sector won't buy what they sell, but actually when you begin to dig, you can see that there's a lot of things, and they have to buy, so they deliver services, but they have to buy a lot of different goods and services to enable them to do that.
Yep. Yeah.
And there are completely different size organisations. So I know of a housing association that employs 17 people. Then you've got like the Department for Education or the Ministry of Defence, which employs at least hundreds of thousands of people. So when you start to look at the requirements, even if you had a contract that looked like the title was the same or whatever, an organisation with 17 people and an organisation with hundreds of thousands are going to need completely different service, and
Yeah.
are going to need our goods, and they're going to have completely different requirements, which makes it much easier for us as smaller and more nimble rather than these big, yeah.
Yeah.
Because everybody assumes it's the big consultancies that win everything. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily. So
No, no. And I think that again is a really important thing, because I think, I have had a occasional look on there, but and I do know that it's very different in scope and scale. And what went through my mind when you started talking about all these different types of opportunities, is other people that I've met. Actually, I think you and I met through the FSB, and other people I've met there. And again, it feels like this is that's an amazing group of individuals that do a lot of mindfulness. Was the one that kind of struck me. It's a very important thing that people need to be doing, and for obviously for a lot of organizations, bigger organizations, they will have this as part of their health and well-being programs, things like that.
yes,
But it is also something that is maybe a specific point in time we need to do more on this. So it sort of strikes me as a really good thing to bring the right people in, and an opportunity for some of those smaller operators to kind of go, oh yeah, that's exactly what I do, and I can come in and get you a bespoke program. It meets your needs. It provides you with that. It maybe isn't a big requirement at the time, but then again, that's where small businesses come to that's why small businesses exist, because they can come in and do that smaller thing and then okay, move on to somebody else. Don't need it to be a longer term thing.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it just struck me at that point that is it's a perfect opportunity, and it gives you such variety of the Santa Claus and his helpers as a
Yeah.
slightly random, but that's a really good, again, a really good example of, you don't know what's going to be out there. You don't know what, what opportunities there are, and any small businesses that are, have a niche, there probably is somebody looking for that within the
Yes.
tender sites. So it is just about, I assume you can sort of set up searches as well. So, if there's particular terms, can it sort of send you, oh, there's a new bid in your area or your field coming through?
So there's different systems for the different nations, and in most of them you can set up the searches that it notifies you. So
Yeah.
alert profiles they'd be called.
Okay.
But Find a Tender, you can save your searches, but I can't find a way for it to notify me.
Oh,
And it's one of the most frustrating things because it should happen.
Okay. Because that is
Um,
quite a big, or like a big repository of these, isn't it? Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh.
Yeah, so I don't quite know why it's been set up in that way. What you've also got in Scotland and in Wales, you can put on a profile
Mm.
yourself and you can be found and asked to bid for contracts.
Oh, okay. Oh,
So,
interesting. So,
so,
yeah.
so Scotland published their stats round about this. I can't find stats for the rest of the UK, but I would reckon that there wouldn't be a huge variation from nation to nation.
Hmm.
So, like last year in Scotland, 90% of their contracts were classed as lower value. So, lower value is contracts typically for goods and services worth less than £50,000.
Right.
But it can be a higher limit than that. But typically it's 50,000. And then 77% of their contracts were quick quotes. So quick quotes are when you're invited to bid. So 77% of those contracts aren't getting advertised to everybody. They're only going out to invited people. So you have to have a supplier finder profile for that.
Right.
So if you're wanting to like bid in Scotland or Wales, I would definitely get my supplier finder profile on there. It's called something slightly different in Wales, but much the same.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you want to get into these bids that aren't been advertised
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And then the last stat doesn't really figure into what you asked, but the last stat that they published is that last year 77% of the opportunities were won by SMEs. So a lot of people assume public sector is for big organisations, that it's a fluke when a wee business wins it, but that actually shows you that it's part of it's happening all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, like yeah, that's a really good for a lot of people listening, hopefully listening to this, that's a really good piece of information to know that actually you're more likely to be on, particularly as an SME, you're more likely to be successful in this because that's what people are looking for. And again, I guess there's an element of you being able to provide something that is a bit more fit for purpose. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily, oh, we've tried and tested this. Let's just do that kind of that larger model. It is, oh, I can make this work a bit more for you. I have an approach, but I have a bit more flexibility within that to fit your needs and to fit your requirements.
Mhm.
I think
Yes.
is really, really well. For me, I think that's one of the things
Yeah.
that I like. Again, there's always a certain way of doing things, but I like to be able to go, well, actually, I'm going to spend a bit of time with your organization and let's make it work so that it is sustainable.
Yes.
That people actually are, I guess, learning a little bit as part of this process, and that's a bit of the education side. It's not just I'll come in and do it for you and then bring me back in another year's time necessarily. That's not necessarily always the approach that makes sense.
And you're right, that's very different in small businesses. In the
Yeah.
SME market, you're more likely to be able to affect change
Mm.
than when you look at bigger organisations.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is, again, I think that's why it's an important thing for that market to be thinking about this as an opportunity, because I guess, it's all about the influence we can have. And I feel like if I go too far, I'll go into a completely different topic. But I said I like that idea of, again, it's most of us have set up small businesses because we have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge that we want to share. That we are doing it from a perspective of we want to help make any organization better, and that is part and parcel of it. Is um, I want to bring my knowledge and you want to bring your knowledge of what's good, what's bad in these different areas, and let's try and ease people through this so that they don't get caught up on some of the like red tape or some of the challenges, and they don't kind of close off opportunities as well. I guess particularly what you're looking at is kind of making this straightforward for people, making this feel like it's an opportunity and not something that they would automatically go, oh, that's a really big organization, so they're never going to want to talk to me. They're not
Yes.
going to take me seriously.
Yeah, and helping them assess it so that they know if it's a good fit or not and
Yeah.
whether they move on. And it could be it's parked until the contract's renewed and they know what they've got to do between now and then, or whether it's worth going for at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think that's a really important thing because you're right. There might be a point where you go, not right now, but
Yeah.
I now know that's an opportunity. So yeah, what if I need to be really focused on what do I do to build up my business in the next couple of years or next 2 to 3 years whilst someone else is working on that, then they can come in at the next opportunity, next renewal and
Yes. And that's not always so. Well, there's different types of contracts out there.
Mm.
So I was looking at a social care contract with somebody, and they have opening points, break points
Yeah.
annually.
Yeah.
So it could be that you're not quite in the position, and that could be because you're a small business, especially small businesses. It's not necessarily that you don't have the capacity to deliver the contract, but you might not have the capacity to apply for the tender right now.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you know that you can wait a year and either get, yeah, and you know when it's going to come out in a year, or you know what you have to achieve in that time, then you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think I've certainly seen that in quite a lot of contracts, to your point, across public care and public sector. So I guess healthcare and local government and central government, that they do build in those points, don't they? Where it's like, well, we'll take a review, and either they'll stick with their existing organisation, which is fine, but if that might be an opportunity to have another conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's again is another thing to have in mind, is that it's not kind of a once it's done, it's done. If you like, again,
Yes.
if I suppose it's that concept of, if you find out about something after it's been let, it doesn't mean the end of the world. It just means, okay, try and understand what that contract was, try and understand, when there may be an opportunity to have a conversation with those individuals again. And to your point, would you be ready? If not, what do you need to do to get yourself ready?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's lots of thoughts,
Yes.
definitely. Which is what I like about all of these conversations that I have, is I usually go away going, my brain was already a bit fried, but it's
Yes.
fried with the opportunity.
Yes.
Which I
And
do
that's a
like
good
that.
thing about having, there's conversations like this, but also one-to-ones with other business owners. You just don't know what that'll open up.
Yeah.
So
I do agree, and I think again, there's a huge part of being a small business owner that we do a lot of networking, we do a lot of these conversations, and part and parcel of that is just that because you're in your own organization, you don't often, we are our own council, which can be good or bad depending on the time of day, where you're up to in many things. And it is just, that's what you have in organizations generally. You have someone else to prompt you, to get you to think differently. I think you're right. That's where it is great just to have the conversation, because again, there's always that time when people might look at something and go, this is too much for me. And, they might just need someone else to talk to go, well, actually, let's break it down. Let's, actually, it's these things, and we could make this achievable. We could make this work.
yeah.
And, let's talk through actually what can you do and what have you got going on right now, and focus on it that way,
And that could take an hour for
Yeah.
somebody, or it could be a bit more support than that. It
Yeah.
could be a relatively quick chat and some action points from that.
Yeah.
Or it could be much more support, and that could vary from piece of work to piece of work.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. So I imagine you find, in terms of the support you provide to organizations, it is very varied in how much time and what they need to kind of achieve a bid, I guess, even to get the bids to the client in the first place, never mind the winning bit.
Yeah, so it can take a bit of work at the beginning of actually assessing and evaluating something to make sure it's right at that point. Because that's what I learned from the job that I left to go into my own business, is that you really need to understand what you can deliver at the beginning, because there's nothing worse than putting all the effort in and not actually submitting something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, really important, that part of it. And then working out what kind of support you want. So in my circumstances, do you want bid writing support, or do you want somebody to handhold you through the process so that you learn, and ultimately at some point in the future you'll be able to do it yourself? And then from that move into review type, where I'm just reviewing the final bid for people.
Yeah.
And what I'm finding at the moment is becoming more apparent is that people, despite there only being one portal in England for finding opportunities, people aren't particularly confident at that part of it.
Right. Okay. So that it's almost a finding the opportunities more than necessarily the what do I do next. It's just
Yes.
the awareness piece.
Yeah, because people aren't confident in what they're seeing and their ability. I don't know if it's well, there's a mix of things within that.
Yeah.
Some of it is it might just seem a bit big for them or too good to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the seeing your title, like what you do next to a big organization, you're a bit like, I wouldn't imagine you coming out to this to need support. You must have people that do this. Why would you need to do that? And I think, yeah, that's definitely the experience. Or being confident that what they're asking for is actually what you do.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's which is part of obviously the bidding process. To me, that's part of, a bit of clarification of, well, you said this, do you mean this? Because again, what's written in bids can be a bit obscure at times.
Yes. And saying clarification there. So there's always a clarification process.
Mm-hmm.
And some people don't have the confidence to use that because they don't want to appear stupid.
Right.
But if you're not understanding the documents, the chances are somebody else won't. So, and there's no harm in asking
Mm-hmm.
because that's what that process is there for. So, yeah,
Yes.
so that's quite interesting.
That's an interesting point because you're absolutely right. It's if the question is not being asked, it doesn't mean that people understand. It just means that either people haven't thought of the question or they just haven't read it in a way that made them ask that question potentially.
Yes.
And actually there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you don't know, ask, because then it's really clear, and it might be a question that someone else didn't want to ask, or they didn't feel confident to ask, but then everyone gets that. Because again, my experience with these is when you ask those kind of clarification questions, it's
Yes.
open source sort of
So
situation. So everyone sees what gets asked, but everyone then sees the answers. So, again, having been, bigger organizations doing some of this bidding, it is always helpful because suddenly you go, oh yeah, well, we were asking that in a slightly different way. Two people have asked a slightly different question, but that's given two different answers, which sometimes is helpful, but also sometimes is not.
Yeah, there's a bit of a mix in there.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting is when you ask the question, and so somebody else, I don't want to appear stupid and ask, and I'm like, ask anyway. Then you get the answer, and that then prompts a whole load of other questions along the same lines. So it wasn't a stupid question because other people didn't get it.
Yes,
So,
exactly that. Yeah, it kind of opens up the opportunity, the conversation, doesn't it? Because people suddenly go, yeah, I didn't want to ask that, but now you've asked that. These are the other questions that kind of fit into that area, and this will help. And everyone goes,
or you've answered that, but you've actually not answered it clearly.
yes.
So we're going to jump on that bandwagon.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask it in a slightly different way, or I'm going to ask a next question. The follow-up is, so you said that, but actually, do you mean this? Yeah. That whole sort of no bid situation as well. Again, I've been in that situation a few times, and it's always very stressful. To your point, it's now when you look back on it, you can always be like, oh yeah, that was exactly the right decision to make, but it's stressful at the time, and it is a bit of amount of work spent. We've spent a lot of time and effort to make that decision. It's often the right decision, but it is a brave decision to make also for a lot of organizations, because the decision to not bid it's a very active decision, but it's sort of like I'm going to take myself out of this, and that's quite a hard thing to do sometimes, because you feel like, again, I should be going for everything. I shouldn't be closing off things, when actually there are, again, really good opportunities or really good reasons why it's not right, and you'd be putting yourself under a huge amount of pressure and stress that isn't going to be helpful for anybody.
Yeah, ultimately you could go for something you can't deliver.
Yeah.
And don't ever want to be in that position.
No.
So yeah, understanding, making that as early as possible is so important, but sometimes it does take learning. So you can be a bit down the road with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully if you've got somebody like me helping you, it would be earlier on in the process.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. As I say, it opens up so many questions and so many things. If you were sort of thinking about this from a I guess, a whole process. Is there any one particular piece of advice that you would want to give to a business owner that's sort of thinking about moving into this area, or thinking about the opportunity that public sector gives to them?
I think it's worth everybody exploring, but I do think that the most important part of it all is the bid and no bid decision.
Yeah.
So understanding what it is that the public body's looking for, and you might have to ask clarification to understand that completely, and then making your decision as early as possible, because that helps inform the next bid you go for.
Yes.
Because it
I
will
think that's
inform it.
good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah, it's always about learning with it.
yeah.
But I do think the most important thing is finding the right thing to go for. Because there's nothing worse than either putting all the effort in and then not winning it, because it can be soul destroying, but getting so far and not putting it in, I find, is really, really, yeah.
It's similarly soul
Difficult.
destroying. It is to some. It's for a different reason, but for
Yes.
the people that have spent a lot of time working on it, and particularly if you've got a team of people, or even if it's just you doing it, it's time and effort spent that then is wasted time to some extent. Yes, I agree, and it's really important that you then spend the moment just to go, okay, we made that decision. What was the background behind that? What does that mean for us going forward? Because I think to some extent you don't learn it's not the lines, but it is the guardrails that you want to operate with. And sometimes you learn that through these processes, through the bidding or not bidding, or through understanding what work is available, and does it fit within my, what I really want to do. Again, back to where, where you sort of talked about, you might have 2 or 3 things that you do, but actually you really want to grow one. But this sits maybe in a little bit of 2 or 3, and you're like, oh, do I do it? Do I get involved? Is it worth it? And I think that that's a really good thing to kind of reflect on, to say, well, that maybe is why you make the decision not to go forward, because actually you were pushing yourself into an area you don't want to be doing too much work in.
Yeah. And when you've got that enthusiasm at the beginning, you want to harness it in the right way.
Yeah.
Not going for the wrong things.
Yeah.
And with that whole evaluation part, I think it's really important to evaluate at the end. So I do that with all clients, is we look at, so win or lose, what we did well, what we didn't do well, and what we would change. Because ultimately, potentially the information you have, you can reuse in marketing or another thing, or in your next bid. But also you want to look at, was this a good fit for you? And is it going to be a good fit? And what would you want to look for in the future?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think that's really important, because I think that's what you learn from going through that is, you might not have won it for exactly that reason of actually you were pushing yourself, or it really, your heart wasn't in it, and not, hopefully that would come across, but actually on reflection, you might think that. So you go, well, next time that comes up, why put myself through that? Or I really did want to win that because it's a really important piece of work that I could have added value to. So what can I do to make sure that next time I look like the right person for the job?
Yes, and we can find more.
Yes, exactly. And I guess, speaking about that, where can people find out more about you and the work you do? And if they want to, talk to you, get some more advice about moving into this sector, where can they connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn and my website, which is bds.support, my website.
Perfect. We will make sure the links are shared when
Thank you very much.
with the podcast. Brilliant. Well, thank you again. Really, really enjoyed talking to you today. It's just, again, lots of topics, and I just love getting into detail of it. And I think everyone can learn lots of things. So thank you for joining me on the Prepared Leader today.
Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. And for our listeners, if you found this episode helpful, please follow, rate, or share it with a business owner who's ready to explore new markets. Until next time, stay ready and stay resilient.